Sound like
back now. We finally got it. Sorry about that.
All right. We're at church and we have all kinds of technical problems before the service starts. We say something good's really going to happen because we're being attacked. So something good's going to happen here this morning. So there you go. So welcome everybody to the September 21st meeting of the CVTA Personnel Committee. Want to just thank everybody for their attendance. Apologies. I think there was some confusion with an email that went out last night with some Zoom options. And I think some people got confused whether that we were in person or live, but thank you for those that are here and those that are joining us online. There is a statement in here regarding our virtual meetings, so you feel free to look at that. Wanted to just pass along, I spoke with Mr. Thornton this week, and he wanted to pass along his thanks for everyone participating and doing this very important work. So thank you all for all the hard work you've been doing with this and for being here this morning. At that, I'll ask Mr. Parsons if we do have a quorum.
So we don't quorum.
All right, great. At this point, the agenda was published, and I would ask if there's any consideration for any amendments, additions, subtractions to the agenda as proposed. It's been moved to approve. Do I get a second? Second. Just moved to second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, we've got an agenda. We're live and we're rolling. In your packet, you have the approval of the Personnel Committee meeting summary. I do know there is a one correction that needs to be made. Mr. Carroll was present in the meeting virtually. So if we can make that adjustment, please. And at that, if there are no others, I'll take a motion to approve as amended. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Page. We have a motion in a second to approve the meeting summary as amended. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. And I say that with reservation because I did review the entire meeting afterwards on YouTube.
Thank you. I hear no objections. Okay. At this time, we will have our public comment hearing. Public comment hearing. Do we have anybody online, or have there been any emails submitted?
We don't have any prior requests to participate. And I guess point for the group is that we are now using the webinar format, which allows anyone to register to partake in the meeting as an attendee. So there is a Q&A option if people are attending virtually that we can incorporate them in the meeting rather than just asking for emails ahead of time.
Okay, great.
That's an option moving forward.
Okay, fantastic. Before I turn it over to, I'm not sure who I'm flipping this to for the HR roundtable presentation, but I wanted to just kind of set sort of the expectations as were presented to me by Chair Thornton. I spoke with him last week, and he is, again, very appreciative of the work we've been doing. In order for the commission to have, there was a question, we chose this meeting time specifically to have this conversation, to be able to provide a recommendation to the full committee as we've been charged. There was a question in my mind of whether we're going to try to get action from the full committee. Mr. Thornton feels that he would rather go and make sure that we're making the right decision and people have time. So at the meeting, we will come up with our recommendation and our findings from the HR roundtable, and then the commission will have a month to review and assess, and then we'll come back in October to vote on any action that is to be taken. So at that, I will turn it over to the Martha. I don't know who I'm turning it to.
Yeah, so since the meeting started, we have had members of the HR roundtable join virtually. So Janet Lawson, Mary Martin Selby, and Yvette George are all three on the Zoom webinar.
Okay.
So if they turn on their screens, they should be able to interact with us.
Well, he's bringing to the mark. Look.
Hi, Janet. We heard you a moment.
I was going to say I can unmute, but I can't start my video. It says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. So
and mine is saying the same thing. This is Yvette George.
So if you're comfortable just hearing us, that's fine. But I'll wait and see what you would prefer to do.
We would much prefer seeing you.
Okay. We'll see.
They're working on it now.
Not a problem.
This page, you want to fill us in on some fishing stories?
Well, I got other things on my mind today. However, I did bring pictures of the proof, so that's all I can say about that.
Okay.
So we don't want to get in that fishing competition with her. You will lose.
Okay. It's good to know.
That's all I got.
I don't know why they're not able to turn on the video. We can just do the audio. That would probably be the best.
Okay, can we put the, Ms. Lawson, will you be going through the presentation you sent yesterday?
I will start, but I believe all three of us have a portion that we will explain.
So Martha, can we at least show the presentation?
Yeah, they do have permission to share, but I also can share it. Which would you prefer, Janet?
Oh, it doesn't matter. What is easier for you all?
If you just tell me to move to the next slide, I'll share the screen.
Okay, we can do that. All right. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for inviting us to participate in your meeting today. We have been working with Martha and Neil in general for, I don't know, going on 2 months now. I think probably mid-July. We were tapped, we being the HR roundtable, which are your HR directors for the jurisdictions that make up Plan RVA. So kind of wanted to just go through how we've started, where we are today, and then next steps. And Martha, if you want to go ahead and advance to the next slide. So these are the current directors of human resources that are working specifically on this project. There are others, but we know there are some new HR directors, some of the smaller jurisdictions. So we're keeping them informed, but this is the group that's doing the most of the work at this time. And if you can advance one more, please. So real quick, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but just to kind of summarize where we are today. So once the HR roundtable was contacted, the 5 panel members reached together or got together and talked about staffing options for CVTA. And we were provided information from HR TAC and Northern Virginia Transportation Authority just to use as examples of other transportation authorities in Virginia. And so as a result, we had provided some staffing recommendations, which I'll show you here shortly. After we met with the Personnel Committee on August 17th, we felt some recommendations that came from that. And so we've been working hard on drafting job descriptions, position profiles for advertising and recruitment, and then working on a recruitment strategy. And Martha, if you could advance one more slide, please. So these two documents, hopefully you've got hard copies in your packet. The document on the left, these were the proposed staffing models that were presented to the Personnel Committee on August 17th. The first option was really one staff member on CVTA, which would be an executive director, and all other staff would really be working groups through Plan RBA, through other regional modes. Option two was kind of the all-in. This would include 4 staff members, your executive director, a chief financial officer, a transportation or planning lead, and a support staff person. And then option 3 is kind of in between. It would include 2 staff members, the executive director and a support staff person. And then all other support would be either contracted or through your working groups. During the meeting on August 17th, what we as HR directors took away was that perhaps CVTA should consider a phased-in approach. I believe everyone likes the idea of having an executive director. So we went with phase 1 being just an executive director being on staff. Phase 2 would actually be hiring a support person in time. And then phase 3 would be hiring 2 additional staff members, a transportation planning director, and then a chief financial officer. So based on this, we started working on a job description specifically for the executive director. And at this time, I'm going to turn things over to Yvette George.
Good morning, everybody. Martha, if you could go to the next slide. And what we have here, and again, as Janet indicated, hopefully this is also in your packet. We started working together on creating a job description based on the information that we had, the information that was presented. So if you look at the job description, it's 2 pages here. The top just is background information in regards to CVTA. And all of this information was pulled from data that was on websites, had conversations. And then you go below where it says organization of the CVTA, and it indicates how it functions like a board of directors, the responsibilities, and also we listed the key committees that no matter which, how you go with it's listed, whether you have committees, whether you select personnel, they will always work with committees, and you'll see the finance committee is listed here, program planning advisory committee, jurisdiction and agency coordinating committee, as well as council of councils, so which is the legal, where they provide legal advice to the CVTA. So I wanted to make sure that that information was also listed in there. No matter who's on or how this is organized, that the committees, understanding that the committees would still be there. Oh, okay, we can start our videos now. Okay. Oh, there I am. So in the next portion, you will see the leadership, ask about key members of the CVTA's management team, the executive director, and who it's responsible for the day-to-day operations. So you'll see a few bullets listing there, telling about the leadership and building working relationships also. Then below that, you will see specific responsibilities, what they will serve as the principal advisor to the CVTA, taking lead role in drafting the strategic vision, ensuring coordination, and looking at all of these aspects, going into preferred characteristics, etc. What we were able to do is look at the 2 that are currently residing right now, which is HR TAC and NVTA. We pulled those job descriptions, took a look at those, as well as look at what is currently being done with CVTA right now to incorporate. I also had an opportunity to speak with someone at VDOT just to kind of get some insight there, just kind of probing and getting their expertise before I was able to kind of put this in there, talk to the HR roundtable and get some recommendations and build the job description. And if you go to, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Mary Martin. So, okay, so compensation findings. Looking at Plan RVA as well as the compensation packages for the other transportation authorities, we basically pulled information. So the top bullet where it says comparable position, salary, and benefit package. The bullets below that is the information that was received when we pulled information and made requests in regards to HR TAC and NVTA. What our recommendation is recommending alignment of compensation and benefits packages with Plan RVA employees. So we wanted to make sure that the board was fully aware of the ranges that was out there for the other authorities that currently exist, as well as what the recommendation of the HR roundtable would be. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Mary Martin Selby.
Thanks, Yvette. The next thing we produced was the recruitment profile. And I believe you have a copy of it. Martha provided it for you. This is a draft. We certainly want you all to go through it, mark it up. Again, it's really based on the job description that Yvette just described. In addition to kind of inserting the job description, the beginning of the document gives a little bit of history about the organization or background, the mission, the structure, the communities that this organization serves. And in addition, we've included the application process in the back. So it's basically the job description with the application process and information about the organization added. We did add pictures on the front, and there are pictures, snapshots from the non-localities featured, as well as a map, and we included the seals on the back, as well as the CVTA logo on the back page, or on the next to the last page. So that's pretty much it for the job description. Certainly, again, working through Martha, we're very interested in getting your feedback, making edits to it. But this is what it would look like when we're done with it. So I think it's back to Janet.
It is. So before we continue, is this a good place to stop and ask if there's any questions about the documents and the process that you've seen so far?
I think it would be open it up for discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Kerr.
So looking at the recommendations and what's listed in the brochure, just a couple of comments, a couple of questions. Number one, what type of background check will we be doing on the individuals that apply? I know that, in Chesterfield, we do a pretty comprehensive background check. And I think that it would probably be important to have that ironed out ahead of time and perhaps have, recommendations from the HR roundtable on what would be appropriate, what wouldn't be appropriate. Again, we do a pretty comprehensive background check for Chesterfield, but we're hiring for 9 jurisdictions, so I don't know what everybody else would prefer. So I think that's one recommendation. We're probably going to need to get a little bit further into, because it's not actually in here, and I think the applicants need to know what they're going to be subjected to when they put in for the job. And then who actually will be pre-screening the applicants?
So, Mr. Carroll, I think the HR roundtable will be going into that.
Okay.
So that's the next piece of their presentation is their recommendation for the process of the hiring. Right now, I think they're looking for feedback on the documents that they've presented so far.
Correct.
Well, I would say that the background stuff needs to be part of the documentation that we're going to put out there. So an applicant, when you look at it, knows what they're going to have to go through in order to get the job.
Perfect.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Peterson.
One concern I have, that this may not be legit because it is in here, but I'm not too sure there's enough emphasis on the financial background that we need as executive director. CVTA, unlike the TPO, is not as much a planning organization as it is a funding organization. How we're working with the funds, and particularly the common funds, requires somebody who has their act together financially. I'm not too sure that doesn't have, don't need a little bit more emphasis on that particular characteristic or qualification. Or move it up in the books for something to emphasize. Because I think that is going to be an important aspect of whoever's leading us.
Especially because we decided to move forward prior to the decision by the finance committee of this is going to be fully pay as you go, fully fund bonds combination. So I agree with Mr. Pearson. So Ms. Lawson, if we could maybe.
Well, we have it in.
Yes, we do.
It's
I
in
just found
here.
a little more emphasis, I think.
Experience of general principle of practice of public finance and then acknowledge that finance plans and best oversight approaches. There's somewhere else I saw it. Several places it speaks about finance.
Yes, ma'am, it does. There's no question about that. I did know that it was in here. It just felt like it was just placed in there, that it wasn't given the amount of emphasis that I think that we may be looking for.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Other comments? Okay. Well, how are we feeling? I just want to make sure we've had a month to sort of marinate on this. And I'll look to Mr. Gregory and Mr. Parsons to keep me honest here. But this committee was charged with coming up with a recommendation on how to move forward. So I think we are well ahead of that with what the HR roundtable has done. But I want to make sure we are all comfortable with the recommendation being, okay, we had three options here, and we've decided to treat them more like phases and bring the executive director on so that they can then move to the phases as they see fit. As we're going to be presenting this to the full commission, I just want to make sure that we are still in agreement, and that is the approach that we are recommending. Here's see head nods from this page.
Option one.
Yep, great. Okay, and I'm sure we will be able to pass on any other feedback regarding these two documents. And at that, Ms. Lawson, I think you're back on.
Yes, please. Martha, can you put the PowerPoint back up, please? Thank you. Okay, so next steps, and actually what's not on here is the HR roundtable will come up with some recommendations on where to advertise. Just so for those of you who didn't work with us before, we've all been involved with the GRP CEO recruiting back in 2015. Later that same year, we also were part of the recruiting plan for our PDC executive director, now plan RBA, Martha's position. And so we are recommending a very similar process in that we, the HR roundtable, will, with your approval and guidance, will kind of take a lead on advertising the position. We will use one of our recruiting platforms, and I believe Hanover County, which is where I'm from, is where we use the last two recruiting. We have NeoGov applicant tracking system. The other 8 jurisdictions would have a link on their job site to the actual site for applicants to apply. And then we would provide the actual applications, supporting documents like cover letters, resumes to the personnel committee. So the first thing is, once you as a committee have approved our documents and our recruitment process, then we plan to start advertising, and we are prepared to start as early as October 1st. This gives us time and you time to go through all the documents. If there's any additional edits you'd like made, we have time to make those edits. We can set up the recruiting site as well as contact professional organizations that you'd like for us to advertise. I was looking at where we advertised last time. Of course, the Richmond Times, Dispatch, the Free Press, the RRPDC website, VAPDC website, VACO, VML, ICMA, and a few others. We can do the same thing, as well as any additional sites, professional organizations that you feel would benefit from this recruiting. So with the recruitment, and to your point, I think it was Mr. Carroll, we will add what that background looks like, which we didn't have in here, but we typically, I think all of us do a fingerprint criminal background, which goes to the state police and the FBI. We also conduct at least 2 professional references. If you would like more, we can certainly do more. We conduct an educational verification. Depending on the desire, we can do a credit check. Not every position, in Hanover, we don't do credit checks, but I believe some other localities do. But to your point, we can certainly include whatever background process we will go through and the candidates will go through or be required to submit to in the actual posting. If you are comfortable with an October 1st go live date, then our initial plan was to close it on October 31st. This gives applicants a full month. During this time, the HR roundtable will do a pre-screen. So each week we'll gather, we'll say, okay, who do we have? What would we recommend? How would we sort these applicants? Would we do a yes, a maybe, or a no? And then with us doing this throughout the month of October, we would be prepared by the end of the first week in November to meet with this group, the personnel committee, and provide all of the applications, the cover letters, resumes. We could probably do that in advance. Meet with you, go through what we had our pre-screening, but really turn it over to you and let you as the personnel committee screen as well. And you then tell us who you recommend for an interview. So we can do that. I don't know if you have a meeting scheduled between November 8th and 19th, but our goal would be to meet with you sometime during that 2-week period before the Thanksgiving holidays start. We were not sure if you would need to provide an update to the full commission, the full authority. So we put on there, we know there is a meeting scheduled for December 3rd. So we put that on there in case you needed to or wanted us to be there to present where we are. If that's not needed, we can certainly take that off of our timeline. And then everything else are to be determined. And it's really your timeline. You tell us how aggressive you'd like for us to be with this recruitment, when you plan to have or would like to have someone on board. And we'll do our best to meet your expectations. If you go to the next slide, Martha, we did put together a swim lane, and I apologize. I don't believe we provided this document, but we can certainly get this to you here shortly. That just kind of shows what the process looks like on a little bit more simplified. And so really it would be, we've provided the recruitment materials. You would then review and approve those, make any edits or give edits to us to finalize. Once those documents are final, then we'll begin the recruitment process. We will provide the applications, cover letters, resumes to you. You'll determine who you'd like to interview. We can coordinate the interviews. We can determine a location. We can actually call the candidates and schedule those, and be as involved as you would like during that process. We expected this committee to perform first round of interviews. The second round of interviews for your top 2 or 3 finalists, I don't know if it will be just the personnel committee or if you would want to take those to the full authority, but we put that under the full authority in case that is the desire. Once a finalist is selected, the HR roundtable will conduct that background. And then we'll provide our information and recommendations to the Personnel Committee. And we expect you would be the ones to make the official offer. And then the last thing on there, I don't know if we mentioned this earlier, but we are recommending that the executive director and any staff, like if you at some point, the staff expands to a support person and then eventually to that phase 3 with a CFO, that in a transportation lead, that Plan RVA be the administrator for payroll and benefits. So these employees of CVTA would have the same benefit package that the Plan RVA team has. And Plan RVA, they would be added to their payroll system. So that's the last bullet on there. And we are ready for any additional questions you may have at this time.
Mr. Chair. Actually, one second before you finish, Carol. So one thing I just want to make sure that we're all understanding. Like I said, at the beginning, we've been charged with making a recommendation. The chair has not charged us with actually making the hiring decision or moving forward with that. So that we don't know what'll happen Friday. It could be we were asked to do this and continue moving forward, or it could go a different direction. We don't know. So right now I think we are we're over delivering, which is awesome. I'm happy for that. But I just want to kind of set the expectation that we serve at the pleasure of the chairman, and the full committee will decide how we move forward. That being said, I do wonder, Ms. Heater, is there anything that we need to consider from the Plan RVA being sort of the administrator of this role with the payroll, and how do we make sure we include that in our presentation to the full authority, or is that pretty much running per norm per RVA, or are there things that need to be considered?
I think that there's 2 pathways, and I indicated a preference from a Plan RVA perspective to the HR roundtable, but I think depends upon whether the CVTA wants to become an employer and be responsible for and then contract with us to administer the HR payroll and benefits packages, or if Plan RVA will serve as an employer of this person and future personnel. That makes a difference for us because for comparison purposes in the Hampton Roads area, HR PDC serves as that payroll and benefits administrator. However, HR TAC is the employer of record for the executive director and the support staff that he has. They do have a number of agreements in place that create access, if you will, to staff on the planning side at HR PDC to provide planning support to the HR TAC, but that's through a contractual relationship. The HR PDC finance personnel administer a completely separate retirement plan. So they're a separate company in the Virginia retirement system. They're a separate company as far as payroll and benefits, and they have a separate personnel policy. So understanding the expectations of the authority around, the official point of employment is pretty critical in how we would be able to set up our systems, anticipating the costs and those kinds of things. So I think, as I communicated to the HR roundtable, for us, it's, I'll say, incremental to bring another person into our existing Virginia retirement system account, to bring another, or, multiple persons into our payroll system. Setting up another company means it's a completely separate activity and transaction. It's not doable, but there is a distinction in those 2 courses.
I wonder, Mr. Gregory, if the statute sets up anything to indicate what the intent was set up by the General Assembly for that. So
the statute authorizes the CVTA to hire staff, to employ staff, to manage staff, all those things. By way of explaining, I'll sort of contrast that with the TPO. The TPO has, or like every other TPO in the state, has the authority to hire consultants, but it doesn't necessarily in and of itself have the statutory authority to do much else. So that's why the TPOs, most of the TPOs in the state, partner with PDCs to provide the staff and everything. So that's why all the TPO staff, as it were, are actually Plan RVA employees. I think Ms. Heater makes a good point. You know, that how do you want to manage the employees? Does CVTA want to hire them their own and set up all those things, or do you want to rely upon Plan RVA to provide those services kind of like the TPO does and have contracts to service the CVTA? CVTA could, by contract, would still have the authority. I would recommend this to hire and fire the executive director, to direct the executive director to hire and fire additional staff, all those things. Those are things that the authority needs to decide. I mean, you've heard about, how that might work, but the nitty gritty about, sort of the back office things, I think needs to be considered as well. So I hope that answers your question a little bit.
It does. So one, to me, and I'm looking for input here. One, to me, if the CVTA becomes an employer, sounds to me like it makes it more independent of Plan RVA as an organization. Versus if, and how did you say the second piece? If they become an employee of Plan RVA, then that independence goes away. So they are dependent on Plan RVA.
I mean, I think, as Mr. Gregory alluded, a lot of it is dependent upon the structure and the content of what the agreements are. I would recommend that if the CVTA were to choose either situation, we'd be very clear in the agreements that the individuals that are hired for the service of the CVTA are directly responsible and accountable to the CVTA. I think the real benefit that you get of housing, if you will, under either scenario is that you're not competing in the marketplace to be able to provide benefits for a very small group of people. And you can take advantage of the back office and administrative functions that, whether you have one person on payroll or you have 20, there's a body of work there that has to be done by someone. I think that it probably comes down to philosophical opinion. Depending on how quickly you envision the phased approach for gearing up your staffing, you could start with embedding the position inside Plan RVA, and it doesn't have to stay there. None of these agreements would have to be necessarily in perpetuity, but it could be a way for you to sort of perpetuate that phased approach that you're talking about if it ever needed to spin out, so to speak, and have a greater separation from a structural standpoint. Again, I think from a Plan RVA perspective, our preference would be that the position or positions as they're currently talked about be housed within the employment structure of Plan RVA that maintains one payroll system, maintains one personnel policy, one benefits program and package from an offering, but also an administration perspective. Certainly, if you go the other route, you can do that, and we can administer that contractually as well. I had another thought, but I'll stop there.
Team, Mr. Peters.
I think to keep this simple, we need to get an executive director on board. These things can change in the future. But right now, we need the executive director, and we need somebody with the expertise and experience to help us go forward. So I'm of the opinion that we ought to go as with the person, utilizing what we already have in place for Plan RVA, and get the executive director on board. Then we can look at how things go in the future when we start adding other personnel, whether we want to move into a separate organization or not. But I would like to have a professional on board with us before we make those decisions.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I second that. I just believe that we need to hire the expert in the executive director, and then that individual can then guide the way on how we want to work, whether it's personnel wise or whether it's financially. I think that's what we're hiring for. I don't think anyone here has that sort of transportation experience or background, and I think we need to bring the expert in and give he or she the ability to shape the organization. Additionally, I think that we need to, I think we need to look at timeline and things of that nature to see when we can get that individual in here. And also the question I really want to know is the recommendation that we make to the full body. Is that gonna, as you said earlier, I didn't know we were signing up to be a search committee, but
We have,
are we gonna be a search
We haven't
committee,
yet.
or is this gonna be a full body operating, task or whatever? But that's something I would want to talk to the chairman about, because, search committees are time consuming.
yes, they are. Thank you, Mr. Stone.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carroll.
So getting back to the first point I was going to bring up earlier, I concur with you that this committee was not charged with some of the things that we've actually moved forward with here, which is going to require their, not sure what they call that document, their chart, to be modified after we bring it before the full committee for further instruction, and not just from the chair, but from the members. I do agree with my colleagues that it would be pertinent to get the individual on board. I think that part of the compensation package that you're going to advertise is equally important. So as an example, if this does fall under Plan RVA and the individual who gets hired can fall under VRS, it opens up a candidate pool that we might not otherwise get from people who have experience already from across the Commonwealth who are already part of VRS. If we open it up differently and we say that it's going to not be part of that, then you may have people who are hesitant that have time and grade in VRS that don't want to leave their position because of that. So I think bringing them on board under Plan RVA with the total compensation package is important, so that what we do advertise for candidate pool will actually probably get, I think, a better candidate pool. As far as the backgrounds that I talked about earlier, I do think that we need to go a little more into the background. For example, one of the things I think we need to look into is both the credit history. If we're going to have someone who's going to be in charge of this organization, that's going to be running our finances, we need to make sure that they are responsible with their own finances. And I also think we need to do internet background searches. Everybody today is, not everybody, but I would say a large majority of people in the country have social media presence. And I would hate to think that we would hire somebody and then find out later that there was something on their social media that was necessarily inappropriate for our organization and have to take action that way. So it's important that we do a thorough background investigation. And I don't necessarily think that we should wait until we go through the process of picking who our candidate is and then do the background investigation only on that candidate. We may do the background investigation and say, this is our candidate, and then we do the background investigation. Oh, no, they're not. So I think once we pull it down to a couple of candidates at that point, when we've narrowed it down, then I think at that point would it be appropriate to do background checks. And then, even going through the hiring process for most, we'll talk about public safety. We make sure we do all the background checks and everything before we move forward with everything else.
Sure.
And it's important for us to get direction from the full committee at our next meeting on what they actually want us to do. Then we can modify their timeline, modify the chart, find out if we need to have additional personnel from the full committee assigned to the committee to participate in the hiring process. Because as the mayor has pointed out, it is a process that does take time. Or do we leave it to our HR professionals to actually come up with the questions of what they deem is appropriate to bring forward to us to say we believe that those are pertinent questions that should be asked in an interview, and actually have them do the interview. And I think there's some credibility to that it may take some of the assertions of politics out of the process, that we're utilizing staff to do the interviews as opposed to elected leaders who some people may view, I don't, but some people may view have their own political agenda. Just a couple of recommendations that I think that we need to look at as we move forward in the process.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll.
So, Mr. Chair, my comment is just very blunt and to the point. All of it becomes what in our budget, what have we funded? What have we funded for the search process? What have we funded for the contractual or the compensation? So I think that we need to find that out too. We were given, where would we advertise? Well, what is our budget for that? Or do we have a budget? If we're gonna move forward to hire somebody, then what is our budget for, what is their compensation plan? Where have we budget for that? I think that, for me, that becomes just as important as everything else. And so I guess back to your original comment, it's at the pleasure of the chair about what we had to do. But I think that's one question that we would have to ask finance and the full body.
Mr. Chairman, to follow up on that, we do have in the budget a line item for looking for the executive director. I think it's line item for the
For the search?
incurred in the search. I do think we need, I guess we need to address this to our HR panel who's done such a freak job for us, but is what are the financial implications to the CVTA by putting the executive director on board? I would think it would be incremental because it's going to take away a lot of the work that Mr. Parsons is having to do right now. So some of that would disappear from the Plan RVA side and come down on the CVTA side, I would assume. But that's an assumption on my part. But has the HR work group come up with any, looked at this in terms of financial application, general ranges that we could anticipate salaries?
We want to be competitive.
Of what we should anticipate as far as budgetary reasons with CVTA.
So I'll start and let the other two join in. So I'm not sure that we've seen the budget for the personnel for CVTA. I think that would be helpful. I know the compensation recommendation was just based on comparative positions within the Commonwealth. But to your point, Mr. Peterson, it is important to stay within budget, and or if the budget is not sufficient to attract the kind of candidates that you need, that may be something that the authority needs to consider. But again, we don't know what that number looks like from a salary perspective. We have not factored in recruiting costs. I glanced real quick at the estimated costs from when we recruited for Martha's position back in 2015, and it ranged between $2,000 and $4,700 as far as what it could have cost, depending on the time and where time out there on a website, as well as the different websites. We can certainly provide a cost estimate for the recruiting costs before Friday's meeting with the full authority. But again, from a budget perspective, we haven't seen that.
We're going to show you that in just a second.
If I could just add to what Janet has shared, in Chesterfield, we've done a lot of executive recruitments in the recent past, and you are going to probably spend right at the $5,000 mark for an executive recruitment. In terms of the salary, I know Yvette shared what the Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia folks are making. If this position is one that you will house in Plan RVA, also as Yvette mentioned, it's important to look at salaries there too, to be in line. So that information we don't necessarily have. We can also look at other transportation organizations outside of Virginia. I know we did some benchmarking when we hired for Martha's position outside of the area, comparable sized organizations in other comparably priced localities in North Carolina and some other places. So we can gather more information to give you a few more data points if that would be helpful. And again, if we could get the salaries of Plan RVA staff, that also might help us hone in on what that salary might be.
Thank you. Ms. Heater, did you have something to share?
I can put the budget, the operating budget for the CVTA on the screen and walk you through.
Sure.
I think that'd be helpful for the HR group to see that.
So this is the operating budget for fiscal year 2022. This is what the board approved in May. Sorry, it's probably a little bit hard to see. Zoom it up there.
There we go.
So right now, the agreement that the CVTA has with Plan RVA for administrative support and staffing is that $210,000. So that's the blend of the various staff members that provide the administrative and operating support. That's Chet, myself, Ms. Firestone, Ms. Musco to a limited extent, the other staff members. The member compensation, as you know, is the compensation that you as members of the authority receive for your attendance at meetings. The other line item that was discussed is the $15,000 that was set aside in this budget specific to a potential recruitment process. That's definitely in line with what we're hearing from the HR roundtable folks. I did want to call to your attention, and Mayor Stoney will present this on Friday during his finance committee report. But the other part that's important is, one, first and foremost, you do have a budget of $143,000 of contingency. And I think that a big part of the finance committee's discussion was to be able to hold that contingency to be able to navigate your staffing conversation this fiscal year. On top of that, at the close of fiscal year 2021, the authority ended the year from an operating budget perspective well ahead. And so I'll zoom this in. At Friday's meeting, Mr. Mayor Stoney will be presenting an item for the authority to consider the carryover of what has turned out to be just about $198,000 of remaining unexpended funds from the operating for fiscal year 2021 into the budget for fiscal year 2022. So the recommendation for the finance committee is to carry that over, maintain it as part of the operating account, and that would be in essence in addition to your reserve line item. There's another agenda item just in fairness and kind of transparency that is asking for the authority's consideration. The finance committee is recommending that $11,000 of the unexpended dollars be allocated to fund a remaining invoice to AECom for the transit governance report.
I thought we already did that.
The finance committee approved it, but now it goes to the full authority.
Okay,
Yeah, so you approved a recommendation to the full authority.
okay.
You had 2 meetings in a row without the full. But anyway, if that does go through on Friday, that carryover balance would then be just reduced down to $186,000. So, I think to Mrs. Page's point, on the offer of the HR roundtable, I think we could start to triangulate what a modified budget could look like and bring that back to you and or the finance committee, which probably Mr. Spoonhauer was your hope previously. So I think we can certainly get back on track with that path to be able to get that in front of both committees.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sure the full authority is going to want to ask that question, so.
Pretty good bet. Pretty good bet.
If I could, I got one more item too on the timeline that we had earlier. You mentioned the November, do we have it? Could you put the timeline back up?
Oh, sure.
One item on there, I just wanted to note somewhat, maybe a conflict, but I want you to know the dates.
All right. Here we go.
Okay.
November 5th.
The 11/8 to 11/19 time frame. The 14th, Friday, the 14th, I believe it is, or not Friday, is the 12th of November through the following Tuesday is the Virginia Association of Counties myself, Chairman Thornton are both on the board of directors, and those days are going to be, if Chairman Thornton wants to be involved with this, there is a certain block of time that has to be considered. Those from Friday through Tuesday is going to be inoperative to I think.
Mr. President.
Just taking one step back, Mr. Peterson, if the authority doesn't want to take action on this until its October meeting, we're a month back anyway, so
Right.
that may not.
Okay.
May not be that.
Right. Thank you. Okay, any other comments before I try to summarize this? Okay,
So I actually have a quick question for the Personnel Committee. So when Martha was showing the budget and showed us $210,000 for personnel, she said currently that's a blend of Plan RVA staff that are performing various roles to support CVTA. So I guess my question is, if we hire an executive director, how much additional staff resources from Plan RVA are going to be needed? Because I'm thinking that 210,000 is going to cover your executive director and additional support that's being provided by Plan RVA. So I don't know if anyone has thought that part out yet, or if that's something we all need to consider.
I think I would imagine the latter.
Okay.
We've been thinking about it.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
In general terms, there will be additional staff support that's needed for the technical work that the CVT has to consider every year. Working with GRTC on their annual plan, coming up with priority projects. That matrix that's been developed and is on the agenda for Friday. Staff will be involved with that on an ongoing basis, and that involves using the travel model and other tools that we have at the TPO. So I think there will be probably 3 to 4 staff members that will spend time on CVTA work, but I'm not expecting it to be significant time. Maybe just in general terms, 30% of their time.
Okay.
Possibly.
And I'll add that, and I mean, the authority has been really wonderful in acknowledging this, but I mean, our administrative support, the behind the scenes to do the meetings and all that, I mean, that is something that I do not expect that the executive director would assume responsibility for. That support that Janice and previously Nicole provided is significant. And the coordination on the financial fiscal agent agreements is another component that does require time and attention. And so I think that there's an opportunity to think through phasing, and certainly once the individual is selected, sort of work that through. But there is, I think, it is reasonable to expect that there needs to be a significant overlap of the two.
So how do we get to that either recommendation or that budget says, transparently, we're going to have an executive director with a salary and benefits. That's one number. And then what we expect to budget for the Plan RVA resources and support. How can we get to that second number, that support number for Plan RVA?
I think we'll sit down and map the work and the schedule. I mean, having the benefit of this timeline, even if it shifts 60 or so days, 30, 60 days, we can start working at that. And certainly I know Chet knows the work
Right.
that has to happen. And so, we can look at that and evaluate what essentially, what one acceleration and one deceleration looks like, and where the two have to stay lined up to make sure that everything moves forward as it's supposed to.
Can you provide when you might be able to come up with that, just so we can get our heads around it?
Sorry to interrupt. I mean, I think it depends. We first want to start with the recommendation of the Personnel Committee. If it's the option one where you hire an executive director and then use the existing structure, that sets us in place to then go back and project out hours and time. If it's some other blend, then we can adjust that as well.
Sure.
My understanding, if I remember this correctly, we're currently in an MOU with Plan RVA to provide services. And I would ask legal counsel, when does that MOU expire? I believe it's in place until probably July 1 of next year, 30, something like that. And so we already have a contract in place which will require being modified if we decide to change those numbers. It sounds like this process, we won't be through with this until at least January. And then it's going to take them time, once the executive director is in place, to actually kind of see where their billables are going to end up being. So we may end up having to make a recommendation that we utilize some of the existing funds that we have budgeted for additional personnel up until the next MOU, at which time they should be able to provide us an update on what it's looked like since the new executive directors come in, what their billables look like, and then they'll present forward to us. And for the next MOU as to what that would look like. And again, as he said, it just depends on what the full committee ends up with at the end here on what it's going to look like in the future. But I think that's kind of the timeline we're probably going to end up looking at, which makes sense. And it doesn't require us to have to redo the MOU at this point. And we've got the money in the budget to bring the personnel on and then work through those other issues and be prepared with a different MOU at the time when it comes up.
Chairman, to follow up on that, I'm also looking at, once we bring an executive director on board, there's still a timeline of them getting up to full speed, at which time I don't think it's going to relieve Mr. Parsons of any of his duties. He's going to have to be still continuing to put in what he's doing during this transition period. After that, yes, I can see him having a little bit more free time to deal with the TPO. But
so to keep you said,
I'm saying I don't think that in this budget we can consider reducing any of the time this is playing RBA. We got to look at whatever the cost of the executive director is going to be for the remainder of this fiscal year as coming from those reserves or the carryover.
Okay. Are we all agree? That sounds good to me. Are we all in agreement with that? Okay, so let me see if I can summarize real quick. So we are coming with a recommendation from the HR roundtable of going with option one, hiring an executive director, and then they will move through the phases as they see fit and the work dictates. We're recommending that we do not bring them in as an employer, but as an employee of Plan RVA, subject to change as the CVTA grows and sees the needs. We are looking at salaries we are benchmarking other areas as well as the Plan RVA staff and working to keep those in line, and that we should assume that the monies for this position are additional to any funds that we have now under the current MOU. Did I get that? So, all right.
One addition to that.
And we're going to do background checks like crazy.
Yes. A question for legal counsel as well is that would this require, since the MOU we have with Plan RVA doesn't cover an executive director as being part of it, would it require an addendum or an additional MOU that just specifically spells out the relationship between Plan RVA and the CVTA relating specifically to the executive director?
Well, as you discussed just a moment ago, I think you could do an addendum to the existing MOU. We'll see how it develops, but probably a new MOU with this new model would be my recommendation, but don't hold me to that. We're going to see what you all and what the full authority come to ultimately. And see how Plan RVA, what Plan RVA input is provided. So.
Ms. Here?
And you're also going to have an executive, an employment contract for the executive director and all those kinds of things. So significant things to be worked on.
I just was going to echo, I would advocate that our MOU with the CVTA is not terribly complicated right now. And I think the minimal level of effort that I would expect that it would take to revisit that would be worth it, particularly as since this organization has formed, the relationship has evolved, and the relationship that we have with the city of Richmond and Chesterfield County, all of that I think needs to be evaluated as it relates to this executive director, to be able to position that individual for the best possible opportunity for success. And we know where we have ambiguity, we know where we have identified, those questions, and this would be an opportune time, I think, to be able to resolve that and make sure that there's clarity for that individual so that they're not spinning their wheels trying to figure out who's responsible for what. So I just would advocate that I don't think it would be that difficult, and I think it would be worthwhile to position that individual for success.
I would agree.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman, real quick. When we state that the executive director will be an employee of Plan RVA, I'm just considering reporting structures and things of that nature. They would report directly to the authority and not within Plan RVA, correct?
That's correct. That would be, that's
This is
my
for
understanding.
payroll purposes.
Right, for all, yeah, I mean, that's my interpretation of what you all have discussed. It would be a Plan RVA employee subject to the hiring and firing by CVTA.
Got it.
Right? I mean, if that, I think.
Yes, I do want to be
Presented
fully.
with a contract.
Mhm.
And so we just have to be very clear and spell out in the contract,
That's right.
spell that out in the contract.
And I do want to be clear, just in spirit of transparency, and I think that the HR professionals can assist significantly in navigating this, but it would mean that for purposes of payroll, just as you said, but for purposes of benefits provision and for purposes of personnel policies. And so I do think that it's important to make sure that from an equity perspective, we create a contract that's very specific to those things that the CVTA and this individual have as a direct relationship, so that there's no ambiguity if the CVTA wants to make a decision around compensation or an extension of benefit that's not typical for the rest of our employees, that we work those things through. And I think we can do that. I have confidence that we can do it, but it is an important factor. We don't want to run into roadblocks down the line.
Chairman, if I could ask a question of the Chairman of the Finance Committee, do we want to have these numbers at our next Finance Committee to look at what the revised budget would look like?
I think having a sketch of that would be appropriate.
Is that possible from the HR group to have and Plan RVA to work together to provide that for the next Finance Committee group meeting?
Which is
October 13th.
October 13th.
Yeah, some projections, a sketch, would be great.
Some head nods. Looks like a yes.
I didn't see any sideways.
I didn't see any.
Assuming Friday goes with this general direction, I think.
So what do we charge with Friday?
Recommendation on which way to go.
And which way should we or shouldn't we have a
So,
executive director?
right, so
Or just plan?
the charge is that we recommend, we've looked at these options, we're recommending phase one. That's really the only piece of the charge. Now, we're gonna be over delivering, saying we have these things. My question is, do we really wanna go out with that slide that says October 1? Because I'm not guessing people are gonna be willing to say, yes, start recruiting for this October 1.
I think the explanation is that we have to, that we are giving a timeline. It's not a timeline in concrete. It's just an idea of how this process would work and the amount of time it would take. Because i.e. Mr. Parsons' statement, even if we do this, then we still come back to our October meeting. So already we're a month out. So I think that the timeline would just be a general idea of how long it would take, i.e. not something that's just stone.
But if we don't, I guess my question is, if we know October 1's not reasonable to post the position, should we just go with an 11/1? Mr. Parsons, you
Yeah,
have a thought?
Mr. Chair, I've already started looking through the calendar to push out a month away. So I think it wouldn't take much to work with the roundtable to update these dates.
I just don't want people reacting like, oh, you guys are making decisions before the full committee has a chance to absorb it by throwing a 10-1
Hey,
date.
that's why they charge
Really?
us.
I think all the committee needs to do
Not
is,
necessarily like
I think they just need to charge us with the ability to do it. And they don't necessarily have to hold a hard, fast timeline. That's when it has to happen.
The charge just, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
No, you're fine.
The charge just says to assess the authority's staffing needs and develop a time frame for addressing the identified needs. So it's, you don't necessarily need to feel like you need to come up with a hard and fast schedule.
We'll have them hired by New Year's Eve.
Come on in.
I mean, really.
Happy New Year.
Mr. Chair, I have a motion if there's no more discussion.
One more discussion. if I could. This is just a matter of semantics. 2 or 3 times you've indicated we hire the executive director and that the phasing would be at their discretion. It needs to be at our discretion. As I tell you, I wouldn't present it as giving the executive director the authority to make those decisions on his own.
He certainly can make recommendations to the committee,
Yeah.
but it needs to be ours.
I'm a rookie.
So, Mr. Chair,
This page.
I move that we recommend to the full authority that we move forward with hiring an executive director, and that our recommendation is a phase 1, option 1, with the working groups and the additional staffing at air full body discretion. That's it for a motion.
They're gonna move to adjourn, so I was.
That's next.
Second. All right, we have a motion and a second for recommendation to the full commission. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. I do believe we do want to also ask for the continued engagement of the HR roundtable moving forward. So I think that that'll be part of what we summarize. So any other discussion? Busy meeting.
Mr. Chair, I would also say that absolutely we are appreciative of the expertise of the Air Roundtable and all of the energies and commitment that they have put into assisting us with this. It is absolutely comforting to know that we have a group of experts that are working on our behalf. And with that being said, Mr. Chairman, I move that we adjourn.
So moved. Second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The only thing we didn't discuss is the next meeting for this. We scheduled that on Friday, right?
I would think so, because we don't know which direction the chair would want to go. So, thank you all. Thanks, you guys.
Right.
Run for the board, they said. It's 1 meeting a month, they said.
I found out that wasn't true when I became, I said I do.
1 meeting a month? Really?
When I,
They said.
this is what they told me. They said, oh, okay, what's nothing to it? You know, you just gotta be likable. And then you just go to a couple of meetings a month. Oh, like a couple of meetings, I could do 3 meetings a week.
Yeah.
Boy, did someone lie to you?
Yeah.
Okay. Meeting over is.
Only thing they didn't allow was the salary.
What I need you to do.
You get paid right.
Yes, that's how that works, right? I told you.
Yes. Portland, Oregon. Yeah, I'm the best man, so
I need to go to the politician, but you have to agree.
he's traveling this, so not.
I'll be reviewing it if I have anything.
But I'll be in
Friday.
I'll be traveling.
No, he's doing a great job.
Exactly. We're sort of waiting on. Okay. Yep.
Glad to be here.
Where we.
So, yeah.
Okay, appreciate it.